They say every haunted object has a story, but Annabella's story isn't finished. For decades, she's been passed from owner to owner, each one swearing they'd rid themselves of her. Yet she always finds her way back. People who've heard her laugh at night never sleep the same again. Those who've seen her head turn on its own, they don't talk about it. Tonight, we open the case file they wanted buried. But remember, the moment you know her name, you're already part of her story. This is Midnight Truths, where the darkness speaks. If you're brave enough to hear what it says, subscribe now, and don't look away. I've never been the kind of person to believe in ghosts. I don't read horror novels, I don't go to haunted houses, and I've never cared for the kind of urban legends people tell at campfires. But 3 years ago, I bought something that changed my life in a way I wish I could erase from memory. Her name is Annabella. At least, that's what the faded little tag on her dress said when I first saw her dot. It happened on a rainy Saturday in September. I have been browsing a flea market downtown, one of those sprawling, cluttered places where you can find anything from antique clocks to rusted tools. There was this small booth tucked in the corner, dimly lit, with shelves stacked high with porcelain. Dolls. Most of them looked old but harmless. Faded dresses, cracked cheeks, chipped paint. But in the center of the top shelf sat one doll unlike any I'd ever seen. Her hair was black, coarse, and tied into uneven braids. Her dress was yellowed with age, lace fraying at the edges, and she wore a small tarnished locket around her neck. What struck me most were her eyes, not the typical painted ones, but glassy, almost wet-looking, like real human eyes staring out from her pale porcelain face. I don't know why, but I couldn't look away. The woman running the booth noticed me staring and gave a small, almost nervous smile. "You like her?" she asked. I nodded without thinking. "She's unusual. She's old," the woman said, her voice quieter now. "Been around a long time. Her name's Anabella. Belonged to a girl once. Poor thing. I'd let her go cheap if you want her." I should have walked away. Something about the way she said, "let her go," didn't sound like she meant the price. But curiosity and maybe a strange pull I can't explain made me hand over the $20 she asked for. When I got home, I put Annabella on the bookshelf in my living room. I didn't think much of it at first. She was just another odd conversation piece, something to laugh about with friends. But that first night, I woke to a sound that made my skin prickle. It was faint, but it was there, the sound of someone humming. It wasn't a tune I recognized, just a slow, eerie melody, like a lullaby being played in reverse. I sat up in bed, holding my breath, and listened. The sound seemed to be coming from the living room. I told myself it was the wind. I told myself it was the pipes, the fridge, anything but what it sounded like. Eventually, I convinced myself to go back to sleep. The next morning, I walked past the bookshelf and noticed something I hadn't before. Annabella's head was tilted slightly to the left. I was sure, absolutely sure, that when I placed her there yesterday, she had been looking straight ahead. I straightened her, laughed it off, and went about my day. But the next morning, it happened again. This time, her head was tilted to the right. Over the next week, little things began to happen. I'd hear faint knocks at night, always 3 in a row, always somewhere close. I'd find the locket around her neck slightly open, though I never touched it. One night, I woke to find her sitting on the coffee table instead of the bookshelf. My first thought was that someone had broken in, but nothing else in the house was disturbed. I stopped inviting people over. I didn't want them to think I was crazy, but the more I tried to ignore it, the worse it became. The humming grew louder. Sometimes I thought I could hear a girl's voice, soft and sing-song, whispering words I couldn't quite make out. Then came the dreams. I would see a little Girl in a pale dress, standing at the foot of my bed. Her face was blurry, like a photograph taken mid-motion, but I could feel her eyes on me. In her hands, she held Annabella. Every time she would tilt her head, just like the doll, and say in a voice that was too quiet and too far away, "You're mine now." I woke from those dreams drenched in sweat, heart pounding, but always with the sickening feeling that I hadn't been dreaming at all. After a month of this, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to get rid of her. I wrapped her in an old blanket, put her in a box, and drove 20 miles out of town to donate her to a thrift store. The woman behind the counter didn't ask questions, didn't even unwrap the blanket, just nodded and took the box. That night was the first night in weeks that I slept peacefully. No humming, no knocking, no dreams, but the peace didn't last. 2 days later, I came home from work to find the box sitting in the middle of my living room floor. The blanket was folded neatly on top, and inside was Anabella, her head tilted, her glass eyes staring straight at me. I moved out the next week. I didn't take her with me. I didn't take much of anything from that apartment. I didn't want to risk whatever this thing was following me. For a while, things were quiet again. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment across town, tried to start fresh. But about 3 months after the move, I came home to find a small, tarnished locket sitting on my kitchen counter. My blood ran cold. I didn't need to open it to know what was inside. It was her picture. A faded black and white photograph of a little girl holding the same doll I had bought. Since then, I've started hearing the humming again, faint, just on the edge of my hearing. I tell myself it's nothing, just my imagination. But deep down, I know she's out there, watching, waiting. And the worst part? Sometimes when I pass a mirror, I swear I see a small figure standing just behind me, head tilted to the side. Glass eyes fixed on mine. I've stopped telling people about it. Nobody believes me anyway. But I'll tell you this, if you ever see a doll named Annabella, don't touch her. Don't even look too long, because once you do, she's already decided you're hers. When I tell people I saw it happen, they think I'm lying, or that I'm just repeating an internet rumor, but I was there. I was holding the camera when it started, and I was still holding it when we realized something had gone horribly wrong. I'm only telling this because I can't keep waking up at night with her voice in my head. It started as a joke. My friend Erin had just moved into a rundown apartment near campus, a creaky old building with peeling wallpaper, water stains on the ceiling, and a smell in the hallways that reminded me of wet cardboard. The rent was dirt cheap, and when I asked him why, he said, because half the people who move in don't last the year. Superstitious crap. The day he moved in, we went exploring, because that's what you do when you've got a camera and nothing better to do. Aaron was live streaming to maybe 6 people on his phone. We were laughing, checking closets, rattling doorknobs, testing how far we could throw balled up socks into a trash can. That's when we found her. In the bedroom closet. Pushed into the farthest corner was a cardboard box sealed with duct tape, so old it had yellowed. Aaron tore it open like it was Christmas morning. Inside was a doll, not just any doll, a porcelain-faced, black-haired thing in a faded cream dress with lace cuffs. There was a locket around its neck and a tag sewn into the hem of the dress that read Anabella in faded thread. Creepy, I said, zooming in on her face. Her eyes were glass, but they caught the light in a way that made them look wet. Alive, Aaron laughed, holding her up to the camera. Meet our new roommate, he said. She's going in the living room. We propped her on the sagging couch and kept streaming. Viewers were typing comments like, "Burn it, throw it out, that's how horror movies start." Aaron loved it. The more people reacted, the more he played into it, pretending to talk to the doll, moving her head, making her wave at the camera. That night, We were reviewing the footage on his laptop when I noticed something. Every time the camera cut back to Annabella, she was sitting differently, her head at a new angle, her hands closer together, her body leaning forward just slightly. Aaron swore we were imagining it. The next day, he texted me, "Bro, she moved. I thought he was messing with me, but he sent a picture." The doll was sitting on the floor in front of the couch, facing the hallway. He swore he hadn't touched her. I told him to put her back in the closet. He DIDN single quotes T.2 nights later, I was over again. Aaron was streaming, reading comments, making jokes. The doll was on the coffee table between us, and someone in the chat typed. Her eyes moved. We both laughed and leaned in close to the camera. And that's when it happened. A thud, loud and sharp, came from the kitchen. Aaron jumped up to check, taking his phone and streaming the whole thing. The kitchen was empty, but when we turned around to head back to the living room, the doll was gone. I swear my stomach dropped like I was falling. We tore the place apart, thinking maybe it fell. Maybe one of us had moved it without realizing. But then Aaron's chat started blowing up. "She's behind you, turn around." Looked at, we spun around, and there she was, sitting in the middle of the hallway, facing us. Aaron was pale now, still holding his phone out like a shield. "All right," he said, "this is officially too weird." He picked her up and shoved her back in the closet, this time wedging a chair under the doorknob. It should have ended there. But around 3 in the morning, Aaron called me, whispering, "She's in my room." I told him to stop messing with me, but I could hear the panic in his voice. I woke up and she's sitting in the chair in the corner. I didn't touch her. I locked the damn closet. I told him to get out of the apartment, but he wouldn't. He said he was going to keep streaming because if anything happened, he wanted proof. That was the last time I saw him in person. The next day, I went to his place, but he didn't answer the door. His phone went straight to voicemail. I called the building manager who let me in. The apartment was trashed, couch overturned, dishes smashed on the floor. The closet door splintered where the chair had been shoved. In the middle of the floor sat the doll. Alone. No sign of Aaron. His laptop was still recording. The red light blinking. I opened the file. The video was shaky, dark. He was talking to the camera, saying something about hearing her whisper, about seeing her blink. Then the screen jolted like he dropped the phone. There was a glimpse of porcelain, of tiny hands, and then a scream. Not his scream. A girl's, high-pitched, sharp, and close enough to rattle the mic. Then silence. Police said there was no evidence of foul play. They treated it like he'd skipped town, maybe run away from debts or trouble. I know better. I've seen the footage. I didn't take the doll. I don't know where she is now. Maybe the police took her as evidence. Maybe someone else has her. But every so often, I'll see a live stream thumbnail pop up online. A blurry still of a doll with glass eyes and a pale dress. And I can't bring myself to click it because I think I already know how it ends. The death of Margaret Dwyer in the winter of 1987 is still officially listed as undetermined, though anyone who knew her or knew about the doll has their own theory. I've spent the past 6 months digging through police records, speaking with neighbors, and reviewing the handful of surviving photographs from her estate. The deeper I went, the more I began to understand that this wasn't an isolated tragedy. Margaret was a widow living alone in a creaking Victorian house on the outskirts of Bramble Hollow, West Virginia. Her husband had passed 5 years earlier, leaving her with a modest pension, a large collection of antiques, and no children. People in town described her as polite but distant, the kind of woman who nodded to you in the grocery store but never invited you in for tea. In December of 1986. She attended an estate sale in the neighboring town of Ridgefield. That's where she supposedly acquired the doll. A local auctioneer remembers it clearly. It wasn't even part of the official lot. Some fella brought it in last minute, said it had been in his attic for decades. Margaret bought it without even haggling. She just looked at it for a long time, then handed over the cash. Neighbors first noticed something strange about a week later. Mrs. Helen McCord, who lived across the street, told me, "I saw her sitting in the parlor one night, holding that doll in her lap like it was a baby. Lights were low, and she was rocking back and forth. I waved. She didn't wave back." Police records show the first complaint about noise came on January 3rd, 1987. The neighbor next door reported hearing a child's laughter coming from Margaret's house late at night. When an officer knocked to check, Margaret answered the door, smiling, insisting she had the television on. There was no television playing in the background. By February, she'd stopped attending church and was rarely seen outside. Her mail began piling up. The postal carrier later testified that every time he approached the porch, he felt like someone was watching him from inside. He couldn't explain why he was so sure the eyes belonged to something other than Margaret. Final week of her life was pieced together from the diary found on her nightstand. The entries start normally, mentions of the weather, her garden, and meals, but on March 14th, the tone shifts. March 14th, Annabella is unhappy. She wants to be in the parlor, not upstairs. I told her I'd move her tomorrow. I think she forgives me. March 15th, heard her singing today. Sweet little voice. Haven't heard that sound in so long. Makes the house feel alive again. March 16th, she was upset again. Said she doesn't like the mirrors in the house. I'll cover them. Tonight, March 17th, the air feels heavy. Like a storm's coming, but there's no rain. I woke up with her sitting on the bed beside me. I don't remember putting her there. On March 18th, Margaret didn't pick up her mail. By March 20th, Mrs. McCord called the police to request a wellness check. The responding officer's statement is brief but unsettling. Knocked twice, no answer. Door was unlocked. House was dark. Found Mrs. Dwyer in the parlor armchair, deceased. Body cold, rigid. Notable. Deceased was holding a porcelain doll to her chest. Fingers locked around it tightly enough to require force to separate. Doll's head was tilted to the left. Subject's expression appeared content. No visible injuries. The official autopsy listed cardiac arrest as the cause of death, but Dr. Alan Foster, the county coroner at the time, admitted in a private interview that it didn't feel right. Her heart just stopped, yes, but there was something else. Almost like she'd been drained. You could see it in her skin, her eyes. I've seen sudden death before. This was different. The doll, identified in Margaret's diary as Anabella, was placed into police storage. There's no record of it being destroyed or sold at public auction, but somewhere between 1987 and 1993, it vanished from the inventory. That's when I found the next piece of the pattern dot in 1994. A family in Preston County reported a similar incident. The mother, 42-year-old Joanne Abbott, died suddenly in her sleep, clutching a porcelain doll with black hair and a pale dress. Neighbors said she'd found it in a thrift store 2 months earlier. The police report uses almost identical language to the Dwyer case. Fingers locked around doll. Notable head tilt. 5 years later, in 1999, a teenage boy in Charleston was found dead at his desk, no signs of struggle. Sitting on the desk in front of him was a porcelain doll described in the same way. His friends claimed he'd been making videos with it for weeks just to creep people out. The tapes were never released to the public. I could keep going. In total, I've documented 6 confirmed cases, all involving the same description of the doll, spanning over 5 decades. Every time, the The owner becomes increasingly withdrawn in the weeks leading up to their death. Neighbors report hearing a child's voice. Some mention that mirrors were covered or that the doll was moved from room to room in odd ways. And every time, the victim is found holding her tightly, as if letting go was never an option. Of all the people I spoke to, one interview haunts me the most. It was with a retired officer named Paul Henson, who had been part of the original Dwyer investigation in 1987. We met in a diner off the highway, and he wouldn't touch the manila folder photographs he'd brought. She wasn't just holding that thing, he said, staring at his coffee. She was smiling. Not a peaceful smile, more like she was proud, like she'd finally given herself over to something. I asked him what happened to the doll after that. He didn't look up when he answered. You don't want to know. The rational part of me wants to say this is all coincidence, that grief and fear can make people see patterns where none exist. But there's another part, a quieter part, that can't shake the image of Margaret Dwyer, alone in her parlor, smiling into the darkness while the doll in her arms tilts its head and whispers something only she could hear. That part of me knows the truth. Annabella doesn't just belong to one person. She moves quietly and patiently from life to life, waiting for the next one who will listen to her dot, and if the records are accurate, she's due to appear again soon. You didn't expect to inherit anything. When your great-aunt Lydia passed away, you barely remembered meeting her. Maybe once at a family wedding when you were 6. She'd given you a peppermint candy and called you Little Shadow. You never thought about her again until the letter came, a thin, cream-colored envelope with your name handwritten in shaky cursive. Inside, a note from a lawyer. Your late relative has left you a personal item, along with the contents of her storage trunk. You almost didn't go to pick it up. But curiosity won. The storage trunk was old, heavy, its brass clasps tarnished, the wood scratched and splintered. When the lawyer rolled it into the room, a musty, sweet smell rose from it, like rotting flowers and old paper. Inside was nothing you wanted, a moth-eaten quilt, a stack of black and white photographs of strangers, a cracked hand mirror, and at the very bottom, wrapped in faded yellow tissue paper, was a doll. Her skin was porcelain, smooth except for a thin hairline crack across her forehead. Her black hair was braided unevenly, and she wore a cream dress with lace at the sleeves. A small locket hung around her neck, and sewn into the hem of her dress, in thread so faded you had to squint, was a name, Annabella. You set her on the kitchen counter when you got home. She wasn't beautiful in the usual way. There was something off. Her glass eyes didn't catch the light the way normal dolls' eyes did. They seemed darker, deeper, like looking into water at night. You told yourself you'd just keep her for a week. Maybe take a picture for your mother, and then donate her to a thrift store. That first night, you woke to a sound, faint, almost. Like humming, you held your breath, straining to hear. The melody was slow, uneven, like someone singing a lullaby they only half remembered. You told yourself it was a neighbor, rolled over, and went back to sleep. In the morning, you found the doll sitting at the end of your dining table. You were sure, absolutely sure, you'd left her on the kitchen counter. By the 3rd day. The humming was there every night, always around 3 in the morning. Some nights, it was joined by a faint creak, as though small feet were walking across your wooden floor. You stopped sleeping well. You began waking with the feeling that someone was watching you. Once, you swore you saw movement in the hallway. Mirror, a flicker of pale fabric. But when you turned, the hall was empty. The worst was the 6th night. You woke to find her in your bedroom. Not on the dresser, not on the floor. On the pillow beside you. Her glass eyes staring directly into yours, her head tilted slightly to the left. You didn't scream. You couldn't. Your throat locked up. Your skin went cold. and for what felt like hours, you lay there frozen, not daring to blink. When you finally found the courage to move, you shoved her into the closet, slammed the door, and piled boxes in front of it. The next morning, the closet door was open, the boxes pushed aside, and the doll was gone. That night you dreamed of. A little girl. Her face was blurred as though you were looking at her through rippling glass, but her dress matched the doll's exactly. In the dream, she stood at the foot of your bed, holding Annabella, and whispered something you couldn't quite hear. When you leaned forward to catch it, her mouth stretched into a slow, wide smile, and she said it clearly, "You're mine now." You woke to find the locket from the doll's neck on your nightstand. You tried to get rid of her the next day. You wrapped her in 2 layers of trash bags, shoved her into a box, and drove an hour out of town to drop her at a donation bin. You didn't look back. That night you slept deeply for the first time in days. No humming, no footsteps. Until, at exactly 3 in the morning, you woke to the sound of something rolling slowly across your bedroom floor. You reached for the lamp. She was sitting at the foot of your bed. You didn't touch her. Didn't move. Her. You simply got up, left the room, and locked yourself in the bathroom until morning. The next day, you called the lawyer who'd sent you the trunk. He sounded surprised when you mentioned the doll. "That's strange," he said. "I thought the family had gotten rid of her years ago." Lydia told me once that Annabella was trouble. You asked what he meant. There was a pause before he answered. "Let's just say, everyone who's kept her has had something bad happen. Accidents, illness, disappearances." Lydia swore the doll could move on her own, but he stopped himself. "Best thing you can do is give her back. She's not yours to keep." You hung up without replying. The words "not yours to keep" echoed in your head. That night, you left the doll outside your apartment door. You heard something shuffle in the hallway at 3:14 a.m., followed by the soft click of your lock turning from the outside. When you woke, she was sitting on your chest. You can't leave now. Not because you don't want to, but because you've tried. And every time you do, you end up right back in your bed with her staring at you. You've stopped calling friends. You've stopped leaving the apartment for long. The humming is constant now. You can hear it when you eat, when you shower, when you try to sleep. Sometimes it changes into words, but they're too soft to make out. You're not sure you want to understand them. And in the mirror above your dresser, you've started seeing the little girl again. At first, just for a second, a pale shape behind you, gone when you turn around, but lately, she doesn't vanish right away. She stands there, her smile stretching wider, her eyes fixed on you. The locket is on your neck now. You don't remember putting it there, but it's warm against your skin. And when you try to remove it, your fingers won't obey. Some days, you think you can feel porcelain hands resting gently against your throat when you wake up, not choking. Not yet, just waiting. And you realize the liar was wrong. Annabella doesn't care who you are. She doesn't care what you've done or where you've been, because once she's chosen you, you're not hers to keep. She's yours to lose. The first time you heard about the Hollow Road was from an old man in a roadside diner, the kind of place that smelled like burnt coffee and fried grease. He leaned across the counter, his milky eyes fixed on you, and said, "Don't take that. Road after dark, son. If you do, you won't be alone in your car." You laughed it off, but he didn't smile back. "They'll ride with you," he said. "They'll get in one by one, and you'll never make it out." You'd been driving through the Appalachians all day, your phone signal fading to nothing hours ago. Your GPS glitched and rerouted you through back roads. The sun was setting when you saw the sign, rusted, bullet-holed, with faded letters. Spelling, Hollow Road. The pavement was cracked and buckled, swallowed by weeds. You drove on anyway, telling yourself it was just a shortcut, For the first few miles, the forest pressed close on both sides, branches knitting together overhead until they blocked out most of the light. The temperature dropped. Your headlights carved narrow tunnels in the dark, catching the occasional flash of movement in the trees. Deer, you told yourself, though they never looked quite right. Then came the smell. Damp earth, rot, and something metallic. Like old blood. That's when you saw the first hitchhiker. She stood on the shoulder, her face hidden beneath a hood, her arm raised lazily as if she knew you'd stop. You didn't, but as you passed, she turned her head toward you. Even in the dim light, you saw her face was smeared with dirt and something else. Her eyes followed your car in the mirror until the curve of the road swallowed her. A mile later, you heard it, a faint sound from the back seat. Breathing, your heart slammed in your chest. You checked the mirror. Nothing. You told yourself. It was in your head, but the breathing grew louder, faster, until it was almost gasping dot and a whisper. Faster. You swerved, nearly hitting a tree. Your hands were shaking so hard you could barely keep the wheel straight. The road seemed endless now. Twisting deeper into the mountains, another figure appeared ahead. This one was a man, tall and thin, wearing a suit that looked like it had been buried in the ground for decades. His mouth hung open, lips cracked and gray. You drove past him without slowing, but you didn't look in the mirror this time. You couldn't. You felt the seat behind you shift. Something heavy settled there. The faint creak of old leather under weight. The whispers began again. Overlapping voices, some deep, some high, all speaking too quickly for you to understand. Then, all at once, they stopped. A hand, cold and damp, rested on your shoulder. You screamed and jerked the wheel. The car fishtailed, tires skidding on gravel. When you studied it, the hand was gone. The road stretched ahead, darker than ever. That's when you realized you hadn't seen any turn-offs, no driveways, no intersections, nothing but hollow road stretching on forever. You glanced at the clock. It was 11:47 p.m. You drove for what felt like hours. But when you looked again, it was still 11:47. Another figure appeared, a child this time, no older than 10, standing in the middle of the road. You slammed the brakes. The car stopped inches from her, but she didn't flinch. She just looked up at you with hollow eyes, her mouth forming a perfect O of soundless screaming. The car door lock clicked open by itself. You reached to lock it again, but the handle on the passenger side began to turn, slowly, deliberately. You floored the gas. The child vanished from the headlights in an instant, and for a second, you thought you'd escaped, but the breathing returned. Louder, closer. This time, from the front passenger seat, you turned your head and saw her. The first hitchhiker. Her hood had fallen back, revealing a face so pale it seemed almost translucent. Her eyes were black pits, her smile wide and sharp. She leaned closer and whispered, "It's too late to stop now." Your vision blurred. The car roared forward, but the road no longer made sense. It twisted in impossible ways, doubling back on itself, the trees shifting like they were alive. Sometimes you saw open sky ahead. Sometimes you saw nothing but walls of black earth. The figures were everywhere now, pressed against the windows, running alongside the car, crawling on the roof. Their hands slapped the glass. Their mouths moved in silent screams. The voices in the car grew louder, chanting something in a language you didn't understand. The dashboard lights flickered. The temperature dropped so fast your breath fogged the windshield. Then the chanting stopped, and you realized the road had ended. Your headlights lit an open space, a clearing. The pavement crumbled into dirt. At the far end stood a massive, gnarled tree, its trunk split wide like a mouth. Shapes moved inside it, twisting, writhing, reaching out with long, skeletal fingers. Your car rolled forward on its own. No matter how hard you pressed the brake, the tires kept turning. The figures in the seats turned toward you, grinning. The child sat on your lap now, her cold fingers wrapped around your hands on the wheel. "You're home," she whispered. The car crossed the tree line. The air inside the trunk was thick and wet, like breathing through a mouthful of soil. The last thing you saw before everything went black was the old man from the diner, standing among the shapes in the tree, smiling. When you woke, you were standing in the middle of Hollow Road, alone. Your car was gone, your phone was dead. The forest around you was utterly silent. You started walking. Hours later, headlights appeared behind you. A car slowed, its driver rolling down the window. "Need a ride?" the man asked, and without thinking, you got in. It began with a phone call you were never supposed to receive. The number wasn't in your contacts, and the caller ID simply read unknown. At first, you were going to let it go to voicemail, but something, curiosity, boredom, or maybe the strange prickling feeling crawling over your skin, made you swipe to answer. You said hello. At first, there was only silence. Then, faintly, the sound of someone breathing. It wasn't steady. It was ragged, shaky, and far too close to the microphone. "Who is this?" you asked, a trace of irritation in your voice. The breathing continued. Then a whisper, "Don't hang up." "They're in your house." Your body froze. You almost laughed it off as some prank, but the whisper was too urgent, too certain. "What are you talking about?" you said, glancing around the dim living room. "You can't see them," the voice replied. "Not unless they want you." "Two, but they're here." Your eyes darted to the front door. Locked. You checked the windows, all closed. Still, your pulse quickened. "Who are you?" you asked again. "I'm the only one who can help you," the whisper said. "But you have to listen to me exactly." The line crackled, and then you heard it, faint footsteps upstairs. You told yourself it was the house settling, or maybe the neighbor's TV. But then you remembered you lived alone, and your neighbors were 2 acres away. "Go to the kitchen," the voice instructed. You hesitated, but something in the tone made you obey. You moved quietly, the phone pressed to your ear. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the blood rushing in your own ears. In the drawer by the stove, the voice said, "There's a knife." "Take it." You opened the drawer. Sure enough, the biggest kitchen knife you owned was sitting there, its blade glinting under the dim light. Your stomach tightened as you picked it up. "Now," the voice continued, "you need to turn off every light in the house." You swallowed hard. "Why?" "Because they can only move when it's bright." The whisper said, It sounded insane, but your hands were already reaching for the nearest switch. One by one, you plunged each room into darkness, the shadows growing thicker around you. You turned off the last light in the living room. You thought you saw something shift in the corner of your eye, a shape darker than the dark. But when you turned your head, it was gone. "Good," the voice said. "Now they can't get any closer, but they're still here. You have to leave." You moved toward the front door, gripping the knife so tightly your knuckles ached. "Not that way," the voice warned. "They're waiting by the door." A cold sweat broke across your skin. Then how the whisper cut you off. "The back window in the laundry room. It's the only way." You started toward the laundry room, but as you passed the stairs, the air changed. It was heavier now, thick with the scent of damp soil and something sweet, like rotting fruit. And then you heard it, a low, guttural sound, halfway between a growl and a sigh, coming from the darkness above. "They know you're leaving," the voice said. You didn't look up. You kept moving, heart pounding, until you reached the laundry room. You yanked open the back window. The cool night air rushed in, and for a moment, relief washed over you. Then the voice whispered, "Don't look behind you." But of course you did. In the faint glow from outside, you saw them. Three shapes at the far end of the hallway, tall and impossibly thin, their limbs too long, their heads tilting at unnatural angles. Their skin was the color of ash, their mouths open and wide. Soundless grins, they didn't move. You scrambled through the window, landing hard on the damp grass outside. You started running toward the tree line at the edge of your property. That's good, the voice said, but they'll follow. They can't help it. You didn't stop until you reached the woods. The air here was colder, the ground soft. Under your feet, the moonlight barely made it through the thick canopy overhead. Keep going, the whisper urged. You'll see it clearing soon. That's where you'll be safe. But as you moved deeper into the forest, the sounds changed. First came the rustling, branches snapping, leaves crunching from behind you. Then the breathing. Not the slow, steady breathing from before, but something faster, more frantic. You started to run. The trees seemed to close in, their trunks crowding together, forcing you to weave and stumble. You glanced over your shoulder and saw them again, their movements jerky and sudden, like a film skipping frames. Faster, the voice hissed. You broke into the clearing, your chest heaving. In the center stood a single ancient oak tree. Its trunk was wide enough to hide behind, its roots like twisted snakes in the dirt. Now, the whisper said, put your hand on the tree. It made no sense, but you obeyed. The bark was cold, too cold, and when your palm pressed against it, you felt something pulse beneath the surface. Like a slow heartbeat, the shapes stopped at the edge of the clearing. They didn't cross. They just stood there, their heads tilting in unison. They can't come here. The voice said. Relief flooded you, but it was short-lived. Now, the whisper continued, you have to make a choice. You can stay here with me forever, or you can run. But if you run, you'll never stop running. Not until they catch you. Your voice shook. Who are you? There was a pause, then the one who called you. And for the first time, you realized the voice wasn't coming from the phone anymore. It was coming from the tree. You pulled your hand back, but the bark seemed to cling to your skin, thin tendrils curling around your fingers. You yanked harder, and the bark tore away, revealing something wet and red beneath. The shapes at the tree line began to move again, their grins widening. The voice sighed. You shouldn't have let go. The ground beneath your feet shifted. Roots surged up, wrapping around your ankles, your legs, pulling you down into the cold earth. You screamed, dropping the knife, clawing at the dirt, but the roots were too strong. The last thing you saw before the darkness swallowed you was the shapes stepping into the clearing, finally free to come closer. And in that final second, you understood they hadn't been chasing you. They'd been hurting you, right? Into the arms of the one who had called. It began on a rain-slick highway just after midnight. You had been driving for hours, the wipers smearing the endless drizzle across the windshield. The road ahead, a narrow ribbon of gray under the dim beam of your headlights. Your phone had no signal, and the GPS had frozen miles ago, leaving you with nothing but a crumpled paper map in the passenger seat. You weren't even entirely sure where you were anymore, somewhere deep in the rural backroads, far from the main interstate. That's when you saw it, a figure at the side of the road, standing perfectly still in the rain. At first you thought it was a hitchhiker, but as you drew closer, you realized it was a woman, dressed in an old-fashioned ankle-length white dress that clung to her like wet tissue. Her hair hung in heavy strands over her face, and she didn't raise a hand to wave you down. She just stood there, her head slightly tilted, watching as you approached. Every instinct told you not to stop, but as your headlights swept over her, you saw her lips moving, not in the slow, desperate way of someone asking for help, but fast, like she was whispering to herself. You couldn't hear it over the rain and the engine, but the sight sent a chill down your spine. You drove past without slowing down. A few minutes later, you glanced in the rearview mirror. The road behind you was empty. No woman, no figurette. Oh, you tried to shake it off, telling yourself you were tired, that the rain distorted things, that your mind was playing tricks. But then, a few miles later, there she was again, standing at the edge of the road, closer this time, your hands tightened. On the steering wheel. You didn't slow, didn't even glance directly at her, but you felt her eyes following you as you passed. The third time, she was in the middle of the road. You slammed on the brakes, the car fishtailing slightly before coming to a stop just feet from where she stood. Her head was down, rain dripping from her hair onto the asphalt. Slowly, she lifted her face. Her skin was pale and bloated, as if she had been submerged in water for far too long. Her eyes were wide and glassy, her lips cracked and colorless, and then she spoke. "Don't go back," she whispered. Before you could react, she stepped to the side and vanished into the dark trees. Leaving the road empty once again, you sat there for a long moment, breathing hard, the rain pounding on the roof of the car. The temptation to turn around, to flee in the opposite direction, was overwhelming. But you didn't know where back even was anymore. And besides, something in her tone, urgent, almost pleading, made you think she wasn't warning you for her own sake, but for yours, so you kept driving. The rain grew heavier, a constant curtain that made it harder to see. The road seemed narrower now, winding through dense forest that pressed in from both sides. You noticed with a rising sense of unease that there were no signs, no intersections, no houses, nothing to suggest you were anywhere near civilization. Then, through the blur of rain, you spotted lights ahead. Relief washed over you. Maybe a gas station or a diner. Maybe you could ask for directions. Get out of the storm for a while, but as you got closer, the lights resolved into something else entirely. A motel. Its neon sign flickered weakly, casting a sickly red glow over the cracked parking lot. Only a few of the rooms seemed occupied, their curtains drawn tight. You pulled in, the tires crunching over loose gravel, and killed the engine. The lobby smelled faintly of mildew and cigarette smoke. A thin man with hollow cheeks sat behind the counter, his eyes fixed on the small television in the corner. When you approached, he didn't greet you, just slid a key across the counter without a word. "Cash only," he said, his voice flat. You paid, took the key, and made your way to the room. The door stuck before opening with a groan. Inside, the carpet was threadbare, the bed sagged in the middle, and the air carried the faint metallic tang of rust. You tried to convince yourself it was fine. Just one night. In the morning, you'd get back on the road and find your way out. But that night, as you lay in bed, the rain still tapping against the window, you heard it, soft footsteps outside your door. They paused directly in front of your room. Then a gentle knock. You froze. The knock came again, followed by a voice. "Don't go back." Your blood ran cold. It was the same voice as the woman on the road. You sat up slowly, heart pounding. "Who's there?" You called. Silenced. You got out of bed, crossed to the door, and peered through the peephole. The hallway outside was empty. You didn't sleep for the rest of the night. By morning, the rain had stopped, but the sky remained a flat, lifeless gray. You checked out quickly, avoiding the man at the desk, and returned to your car. But when you pulled out of the parking lot and onto the road, your stomach turned to ice. There she was, standing just a few yards ahead in the same soaked white dress. Her hair plastered to her face. This time you didn't try to pass. You stopped the car, rolled down the window, and shouted, "Who are you? What do you want from me?" She stepped closer, her movement slow and deliberate. When she was close enough for you to see her face clearly, you realized something awful. She looked familiar. It took a moment for your brain to catch up, but then it hit you. You had seen her face before. In a photograph. In an old newspaper article about a woman who had gone missing on this very stretch of road years ago. The article had said she drowned in a nearby river. Her body was never found. Her lips moved again, the same words as before, "Don't go back." You were about to ask her what she meant when you heard it. An engine behind you. You glanced in the rearview mirror and saw headlights cresting the hill, coming fast. Too fast. The woman stepped back into the trees without another word. The headlights grew brighter. The car behind you wasn't slowing down. You slammed the accelerator, tires screeching on the wet pavement. The pursuing car followed, closing the distance. You pushed the engine harder, the speedometer climbing, the road twisting dangerously ahead. And then you saw it, a fork in the road. The GPS was still dead, but instinct screamed at you to take the left turn. You swerved onto it, the pursuing car overshooting and disappearing into the darkness behind you. The road narrowed even more, the trees crowding closer until their branches scraped the roof of your car. You drove for what felt like hours before finally emerging onto a wider, better lit stretch of highway. Only then did you breathe. But as the relief began to sink in, you glanced in the rearview mirror. She was sitting in your back seat, her hair hung over her face, dripping water onto the upholstery. She didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there, her pale hands resting in her lap. And then, without lifting her head, she whispered, "You didn't listen." The lights ahead, the ones you thought were safety, flickered and died, plunging the road into darkness. And in that blackness, you finally understood what she had been warning you about. You had gone back. The wind carried a bitter chill that night, the kind that seemed to seep into your bones, no matter how tightly you wrapped your coat around you. The streets of Hollow Creek were almost entirely deserted. Street lamps buzzed with weak yellow light, some flickering as if struggling to keep the dark at bay. You had been sent here on assignment, a job you didn't particularly want but couldn't refuse, to investigate the sudden and unexplained disappearance of 3 people in the last 2 weeks. All 3 had last been seen within a half-mile radius of the Hollow Creek Library. The building had stood there for more than a century, its stone facade weathered and streaked with black from years of rain. Most of the townsfolk avoided it, and when you asked why, they changed the subject, or mutter something about keeping out of trouble. But your work required answers, and if the library was the common thread, then that's where you had to go. It was 11:48 p.m. when you reached the front steps. The heavy oak doors were unlocked, which immediately struck you as odd. Inside, the air was dry and dusty, carrying the faint scent of old paper. The dim glow of desk lamps cast long shadows between the towering shelves. The place was utterly silent. You walked deeper inside, your footsteps muffled by the threadbare carpet. Rows upon rows of books loomed over you like sentinels, their spines cracked, their titles barely legible. A small desk sat near the center of the main room, and behind it, an elderly man in a tweed jacket looked up from a ledger. "Library's closed," he said without any real conviction, his voice hoarse and rasping. "I'm here to ask about some missing people," you said, keeping your tone even. His eyes narrowed. "No one's missing. Not anymore." The way he said it made the hairs on your arms rise. "What do you mean by that?" you asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he glanced toward a shadowed corridor at the far end of the room, a section of the library you hadn't noticed before. The doorway there was framed in black wood, its arch carved with strange symbols you didn't recognize. Without another word, the man returned his gaze to the ledger, his pen scratching across the page. "Decided to take your chances and move toward the dark corridor." The air seemed heavier there, the dim light fading until it felt as though you were stepping into a tunnel. The shelves here were different, taller, narrower, packed so tightly with books that the gaps between them were no more than a hand's width. The deeper you went, the colder it became. Your breath clouded in front of you, and a faint sound began to emerge from somewhere ahead, a low, rhythmic whispering, almost like chanting. You turned a corner and froze. At the end of the narrow aisle stood a figure in a long black robe, facing away from you. The hood concealed its head entirely, and its hands, pale and thin, rested on the spines of two massive books on the shelf before it. You took a cautious step forward. The figure didn't move, but the whispering grew louder. "Hello?" You called softly. The figure turned. Its face was not a face at all, but a mass of paper, crumpled. Yellowing pages with words scrawled in a language you didn't know. Where eyes should have been, two deep black hollows stared out at you. The thing stepped forward. You stumbled back, your shoulder hitting the edge of a shelf. One of the books fell open at your feet, and the pages began to flip rapidly on their own, the words bleeding and shifting until they formed a sentence, once written, never unwritten. The figure's paper face tilted slightly as if studying. You then reached out with one pale, ink-stained hand. You turned to run, but the shelves had shifted somehow, twisting into a labyrinth that hadn't been there moments ago. The aisles stretched on endlessly in both directions. The whispering followed you. You ran blindly, turning corner after corner, your heart pounding. Every few seconds you'd pass another fallen book, each one opening as you approached, its pages forming sentences that seemed to speak directly to you. Your name is already here. The ending is written. Do not try to leave. Panic clawed at your chest. You finally came to a door, narrow, made of dark wood, its surface carved with the same strange symbols as the archway. You shoved it open and stepped inside. It was another room of shelves, but these books were different. They were newer, their covers intact, each one bearing a single name on the spine in gold lettering. You scanned them quickly and felt your stomach drop. Every missing person's name was here. And then you saw it, a book with your name on it. The cover was cold to the touch, almost damp, as if it had been waiting for you. Against every instinct screaming at you to stop, you opened it. The pages. Inside were blank at first, but words began to bleed through the paper, letter by letter, describing exactly what you were doing in that very moment. Your breathing quickened. You flipped ahead, desperate to see the last page. But when you reached it, the final line was still being written before your eyes. And when they looked up from the book, the shelves were gone. The room around you shifted, the shelves, folding inward like closing jaws. The doorway had vanished, replaced by more rows of books stretching into darkness. Somewhere behind you, the paper-faced figure's whisper turned into a wet, rasping laugh. You backed away, clutching the book to your chest, but the shelves moved with you, herding you deeper into the maze. Your panic rose to a breaking point, and then you heard footsteps that weren't your own. You turned a corner and saw the old librarian. His face was pale, eyes dull, but his voice was steady. You opened it, he said simply. What happens? Now, you asked, your voice shaking. His gaze dropped to the book in your hands. It happens now. The lights overhead flickered and died, plunging you into darkness so complete you couldn't see your own hands. You heard the soft rustle of paper all around you, closing in. Pages brushing against your arms, your legs, your face. Hundreds, maybe thousands of them, each whispering in that same unknown language. You tried to scream, but the paper poured into your mouth, filling your lungs, your throat, cutting off your breath. Your vision blurred, and the last thing you saw before the darkness swallowed you completely was the open page of your book. The ink still writing. They were never seen again. When the lights flickered back on, the aisle was empty. Shelf where the old librarian now stood. He reached out and slid a new book into place. Your name gleamed on the spine in gold. The rain had been falling for hours, soaking the cracked asphalt of Red Hollow Road until it glistened like black glass under the dim glow of the occasional street lamp. You were driving home from an out-of-town visit, your wipers squealing with Every pass, the rhythmic thump blending with the low hum of your engine. The road was narrow, lined with skeletal trees that bent under the weight of the storm. At 1:13 a.m., your GPS froze. The blue route line blinked once, then vanished completely. The screen went black. You slowed down, gripping the wheel tighter, your headlights cutting only a narrow cone into the dense fog ahead. That was when you saw it, a sign you didn't remember passing before. Mara's End, 3 miles. The letters were faded, nearly swallowed by moss, but something about the name made your stomach tighten. You didn't recall any such town in this area. Still, with your GPS dead and no signal on your phone, you figured a town, any town, might mean a motel or a diner where you could wait out the storm. The road twisted into sharper turns, the trees closing in until they formed a kind of tunnel. When the town finally appeared, it was sudden, as if it had been hidden behind a curtain of rain. The first building you saw was a gas station, its neon sign flickering weakly. Beyond it, the main street stretched into darkness, lined with buildings that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. You parked in front of a diner. The windows were clouded with condensation, the glow inside warm and oddly inviting. When you stepped through the door, a bell jingled overhead. The smell of coffee and frying bacon hit you, though the place was eerily empty. A woman stood behind the counter. Her hair was silver, pulled into a neat bun, her uniform pressed and spotless. She smiled politely, but her eyes didn't quite match the expression. "Long way from home, aren't you?" she asked, her voice calm, almost soothing. "Yeah," you replied, glancing around. "Just passing through. Thought I might wait out the storm here." She nodded, pouring a cup of coffee without asking if you wanted one. As she slid it toward you, you noticed her hands were unusually pale, the veins beneath the skin dark like ink. "You can wait here," she said, "but don't go outside after midnight." You frowned. "Why not?" Her gaze drifted toward the window where the rain streaked down in silver ribbons. "Because they'll see you." Before you could ask who she meant, the bell over the door jingled again. A man stepped in, tall, thin, wearing a dripping raincoat. He didn't speak to you or the woman, just went to a booth in the far corner and sat facing the wall. The woman behind the counter leaned closer to you. "It's starting," she whispered. You turned toward the window. The rain was slowing now, the fog thinning just enough to reveal movement in the street outside. At first, you thought they were people, figures drifting between the buildings, but their movements were strange, jerky, as if their limbs bent in ways they shouldn't. By one, they turned their heads toward the diner. Their faces were pale and featureless, like wax masks that had begun to melt. Where eyes should have been, there were only deep hollows that seemed to swallow the light. "They come every night," the woman said softly, "looking for the ones who don't belong." A cold weight settled in your chest. "And what happens if they find them?" She didn't answer. The bell above the door jingled again, though no one entered. The wind outside had stopped entirely. The street was silent except for the faint tapping, like fingernails. Against the diner's glass dot, the man in the corner booth stood slowly. He didn't look at you as he walked to the door, opened it, and stepped outside. The figures immediately closed in around him, their hands stretching impossibly long. You expected him to scream, to fight, but he simply went still as they pressed their hands to his face. When they pulled away, his features were gone, completely smooth, like a blank sheet of paper. They took him into the fog. You stumbled back from the window, heart racing. "What the hell are they?" you demanded. "They're the hollow men," the woman said, her voice as steady as ever. "Once they take your face, you belong to them." You moved toward the door, intent on getting to your car and leaving, but she blocked your way. "If you go now, they'll know you're not from here, and they'll follow." So you stayed. Minutes stretched into an hour, the figures outside pacing, pausing, sometimes pressing their faceless heads against the glass as if trying to sense you. The clock on the wall ticked toward 3 a.m., and just as suddenly as they had appeared, the hollow men turned and melted back into the fog. The woman sighed as though relieved. You should leave now. The road will open for you. You didn't understand what she meant, but you weren't going to argue. You hurried to your car, the streets eerily quiet. As you drove out of Marrow's End, the fog thinned, the rain stopped, and the road you'd come in on stretched straight ahead, no sign of the twisted turns you remembered. When you finally got home, you told yourself it must have been some strange nightmare brought on by exhaustion. But that night, as you passed the mirror in your hallway, something caught your eye. Your reflection wasn't looking at you, Dot. It was staring slightly too. The side, its expression blank, its eyes two deep hollows. The wind that night carried an icy sharpness, the kind that cut straight through your jacket, no matter how tightly you pulled it around you. You were driving along a stretch of rural highway, far from any town or rest stop, with only the occasional road sign flickering in the beam of your headlights. The clock on your dashboard read 2:47 a.m., and the air felt unnervingly still, as if even the trees lining the road were holding their breath. You weren't supposed to be here. This wasn't the route you normally took. But a detour sign back near the county line had forced you onto this forgotten road. Your phone showed no signal. The GPS had been frozen for miles, and the world outside had begun to feel unnervingly empty. That was when you saw it, a narrow dirt lane branching off to the right, marked only by a weathered sign that read, Hollow's Cross. It didn't look like much, just a path swallowed by shadows, but the unsettling part was that you were sure the sign hadn't been there a moment earlier. You slowed, debating whether to turn back, but in that instant your headlights flickered. When they came back, you were already halfway down the lane. The dirt road wound deeper into the trees, the canopy overhead choking out the moonlight. The air seemed thicker here, the silence pressing against the glass of your windows. After what felt like 20 minutes, you came to a clearing, and in the center of it stood a church. Its white paint was peeling, the steeple leaning slightly, and every window was dark. A small graveyard sprawled beside it, the crooked headstones jutting up like jagged teeth. You weren't a religious person, but something about the sight of the church stirred a primal unease in your chest. Still, with nowhere else to go, you pulled into the gravel lot. The front door was unlocked out inside. The air was colder, smelling faintly of damp earth and something faintly metallic like rust or blood. Wooden pews lined either side of the aisle, their surfaces warped and splintered. At the far end, the altar stood in shadow, lit only by a thin beam of moonlight, cutting through a broken pane. You told yourself you'd just rest for a few minutes before finding your way back. But as you sat down, the silence deepened. It wasn't the normal hush of an empty building. It was a complete absence of sound, as if the world outside had ceased to exist. Then you heard it, a faint scratching coming from beneath the floorboards. At first, you thought it might be an animal, but the sound grew louder, more deliberate, like fingernails dragging along wood. You stood, heart hammering, and backed toward the door. That was when you saw movement in the corner, a shadow detaching itself from the darkness, stretching impossibly tall. It didn't walk toward you. It glided, your throat tightened, your voice catching before it could form a word. A figure stopped just a few feet away. Though the shadows clung to it, you could make out the vague outline of a face, thin, pale, and framed by something like a tattered hood. But it wasn't its appearance that froze you in place. It was the sound. It began whispering your name. The voice was thin and wet, like breath forced through water. You hadn't told anyone where you were going tonight. You hadn't spoken your name aloud since you'd left home. When you stumbled backward, your heel caught on something, a loose board in the floor. The wood gave way, and you fell hard onto your hands. As you scrambled upright, your eyes caught a glimpse beneath the floorboards. There were faces down there, dozens of them. They were pressed against the dirt, their skin pale and stretched tight, their mouths opening and closing soundlessly. Some had eyes, wide and unblinking. Others had only smooth, empty hollows. One of them, you swear, was mouthing your name in perfect sync with the whispering figure in front of you. You ran. The church door slammed shut behind you with a force that rattled the rotting wood. The graveyard was no better. The headstones seemed closer now, the air colder. You made for your car, your footsteps crunching too loudly in the stillness. The second you slid into the driver's seat and turned the key, your headlights illuminated the road ahead, and that's when you saw them. Figures stood at the edge of the clearing, half hidden in the tree line. They were tall and thin, their faces obscured by hoods, their hands dangling too far down, the fingers unnaturally long. One stepped forward, and in the beam of your headlights you saw that its hands were covered in dirt, fresh, wet dirt. The engine roared to life, and you tore out of the lot, gravel spitting under your tires. The road seemed longer now, the trees on either side warping and twisting in ways that made your stomach lurch. You kept your eyes forward, afraid of what you might see if you looked in the rearview mirror. Eventually, the trees broke, and you found yourself back on the main road. You drove until the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, not daring to stop until you saw the familiar lights of a gas station. You pulled in, shaking, your hands numb on the wheel. Inside, the cashier gave you a puzzled look. Rough night? He asked. You nodded weakly. Got lost, ended up at some old church. Place called Hullo's Cross. The man's face went still. Hullo's Cross? You confirmed with a nod. He leaned in, lowering his voice. That place burned down 40 years ago. No one's been out there since. Not unless they were called. Before you could ask what he meant, you noticed something on your sleeve. A streak of dark, wet dirt. The exact same shade as the soil you'd seen under the church floor. That night, when you finally made it home, you tried to sleep. But at exactly 2:47 a.m., you woke to the sound of fingernails dragging across the floor beneath your bed, and somewhere in the dark, a voice whispered your name. Glassy had always been a source of comfort for you. Growing up in a small coastal town, the rhythm of the waves was like a lullaby, and the salt air felt like a part of your own breath. But when you moved back after years away, you noticed the ocean didn't feel the same. The tide seemed wrong. The water was darker, almost black at night, and sometimes it smelled faintly of rot, as if something deep beneath the surface had started to decay. It was late October when the storms rolled in. For 3 days, the sky stayed low and heavy, rain slashing sideways against windows, and the sea roared loud enough to shake the walls. The locals knew not to go near the shore during weather like this, but on the 4th night, just after the wind died down, you found yourself drawn there, as if something was calling you. The beach was empty except for the shapes littering the sand. At first you thought they were just driftwood, but as you got closer you saw they were fish, dozens of them, all bloated and pale, their eyes milky. The waves crashed in sluggishly, and each retreat left more of them stranded on the shore. Then you saw the figure. It stood at the edge of the water, tall and still, wearing something long and tattered that flapped lightly in the breeze. Its head tilted as you approached, but it didn't move away. The closer you got, the stranger it looked. Its skin was slick and glistening under the moonlight, and instead of hair, thin tendrils clung to its scalp, swaying like seaweed. You froze when it turned toward you fully. Its eyes were round and glassy, reflecting the pale shimmer of the water, and its mouth was a thin slit that seemed far too wide. You didn't remember running, only the sensation of your feet slamming into the wet sand and the sound of your breath, tearing through your throat until you made it back to your car. The next morning, you told yourself it had just been your imagination. The storm, the dark, the unsettling scene on the beach. But then the dreams began. Each night you'd wake in a cold sweat, remembering flashes of the deep, water pressing in from all sides, something winding around your legs, pulling you downward. And always there was a voice. It wasn't words at first, more like a hum, low and resonant, vibrating in your skull. But over the nights, the hum became language. It whispered your name. A week later, you got the call from Eli, an old friend, who worked on the docks. His voice was strained. "You need to come down here," he said. Now, when you arrived, the entire pier smelled of brine and something far worse, a coppery tang that turned your stomach. At the end of the dock, fishermen were crowded around something covered with a tarp. Eli pulled you aside. "We found her boat," he said, and your chest tightened. He didn't have to say the name. Everyone in town had been talking about Mara, a local diver who'd gone missing 3 nights earlier. It washed up with the tide, and you should see this. He led you forward and pulled back the tarp. It wasn't Mara's body underneath. It was the hull of the boat. The wood was gouged in long, deliberate lines, as if something with claws had scraped it from underneath. Embedded in the grain were strands of something dark and slick, like hair, but thicker, rope-like, and glistening with seawater. Eli said they'd found her diving gear still in the boat, but no sign of her. And when they'd radioed the Coast Guard, the line had filled with static, and under it, a low hum. Eli swore it matched the one you'd been hearing in your dreams. That night, you didn't sleep. You sat at your kitchen table, staring out at the black horizon where the ocean met the sky. Around 2 a.m, the hum began again, faint at first, then louder. You stood and went to the door, even though every part of you screamed not to. Outside, the air smelled of salt and decay. The humming pulled you down the street toward the pier. The wood groaned under your weight as you walked to the very edge. The sea below was unnaturally calm, its surface like polished glass. That was when you saw it, a pale face just beneath the surface. Watching you dot, it rose slowly, and as it broke the water, you realized it wasn't breathing. Its eyes didn't blink, its lips barely moved, but the hum grew louder, vibrating in your bones. And then it spoke, in a voice that was not a voice, echoing inside your skull. "Come back to us." You stumbled backward, but before you could turn, something cold and wet wrapped around your ankle. It pulled hard, and you went down, slamming onto the pier. Your nails scraped the wood as you tried to grab hold, but the pull was relentless. You kicked, shouting, but the sound seemed swallowed by the air. Then suddenly it stopped. You scrambled to your feet, heart hammering, and saw nothing but the still black water. But you knew it hadn't been a hallucination. Your ankle was slick with seawater, and your skin burned where it had touched you. The following days blurred together. More fish washed up on the shore. The fishermen refused to go out past the cove, and at night the hum never left, sometimes soft, sometimes loud enough to make the windows rattle. You stopped answering Eli's calls, afraid of what you might hear. On the 8th night after the storm, you woke to the sound of dripping. Water in your bedroom. When you sat up, your heart seized. The floor was wet. The water was ice cold, pooling around your bed, rippling slightly as if stirred from beneath. The hum was deafening now, and you realized it wasn't coming from outside. It was inside your head, vibrating through your teeth. You stood on the mattress, scanning the room, and that was when you saw her. Mara. She was standing in the corner, soaked to the bone, her wetsuit torn in places, her skin pale and bloated. Her eyes were cloudy, her lips purple, and thin strands of seaweed hung from her hair. But she was smiling. "You didn't listen," she said, her voice watery and distorted. "It's easier if you don't fight it." The water rose quickly, lapping at the mattress, and you could smell the ocean now, strong and overwhelming. Mara reached out a hand, and you saw her fingers were webbed, the skin between them thin and translucent. Before you could move, something erupted from the water, tendrils, slick and glistening, wrapping around your arms and legs. You fought, but they were impossibly strong, pulling you down into the freezing dark. The last thing you saw before the water closed over your head was Mara, smiling wider now, her cloudy eyes unblinking as she whispered, "Welcome home." When you woke, you were lying on wet sand. The sun was rising, and the beach was empty except for you. You coughed up seawater, your chest aching, and stumbled to your feet. The waves were calm again, as if nothing had happened. But as you walked back toward town, you noticed something on your skin. Faint lines stretching between your fingers. They looked like the beginnings of webbing dot, and in the back of your mind, under the sound of the waves, you could still hear the hum.